The Ain't No Fang podcast. From Arizona Sports, Ain't No Fang.
Welcome into Ain't No Fang, Arizona Sports Diamondbacks podcast, and we are 9 days away from opening day, and that means we bring in a very, very special guest who has not been on the show before, and I'm super excited because all we do is talk about baseball and ridiculous scenarios that never happen, and also over teams that we do cover, don't cover, basically anything, all things baseball. This is a guy to talk to, and that's Jesse Friedman with a mustache. Jesse, how's it going?
Yeah, Jesse Friedman with a mustache. As I've told you, Alex, we're still experimenting. We'll see if the mustache sticks around. But yeah, you and I have probably talked baseball for, I want to say, about 1,000 hours here over the last 2 or 3 years,
that's
like maybe more than 1,000 hours in the press box. Yeah, right. The expected hours is much higher. But yeah, somehow this is the first time we've ever talked baseball like on the air together. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited. It should be a good time.
Absolutely. And with you coming in here and with it being so close to opening day, which I guess technically we're in the regular season because as of 3 o'clock this morning, the Dodgers played the Cubs. Did you wake up?
I did not wake up.
I did.
Really?
I don't know if it was a good decision or not.
You're awake.
Probably isn't.
You're awake. You
Somehow
seem alert.
Awake. Yeah. I'm only alert because I got like a ton of free food from Chase Field because they did their Taste of Chase, their What's New at Chase Field, all that kind of stuff. But,
there you go.
Yeah. I don't know. Big takeaways from Dodgers Cubs was that Shohei Ohtani's pretty good. Shota Imanaga's pretty good. And Yoshinobu Yamamoto's pretty good. And Japan loves baseball. There we go.
You pretty much summed it up.
Pretty much got it.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we want to do today, though, the Diamondbacks are expected to compete for a postseason spot. It's their expectation that they're going to make it back to October after winning 89 games and missing the playoffs via tiebreaker last year. So we wanted to tier the National League to kind of figure out who are kind of the main adversaries of the Diamondbacks going to be this year, not only in the division, but also when you look around the league, because last year, those games against Atlanta and those games against the Mets, of which they lost the tiebreakers to both of them, really, really hurt at the end of the year. And so we want to kind of go over teams to kind of highlight which matchups at the end, like when you get into the season, okay, this series against Atlanta is pretty huge if you look at it, and kind of every game is huge, but those in particular have a specific microscope underneath them.
Yeah.
So we're going to tier these up into 5 tiers. Are you even trying? We went over a handful of possibilities for what that one could go to. It's shot. Are you even trying?
Kind of a lot of teams that you could argue fit in the "Are you even trying" category.
I kept mine a little smaller because I think there are 2 teams that stand above the rest when we get to that one.
Yeah.
We have to squint. Everything goes right, they can get in there.
We're squinting pretty hard on some of these teams.
Yeah, some more than others. I would definitely say
some more than others.
Has the bones, has the bones of a playoff team, but maybe isn't among the top echelon. Dangerous, and then surefire. So we're going to start. I suppose we should start from the bottom to keep the suspense going for the top, and because these are going to be a lot quicker to kind of move out of the way and then keep going. So let's start at the bottom. Are you even trying? How many teams do you have in this tier?
I have 2 teams in this tier, Alex.
I also have 2 teams.
And I'm guessing that they're probably the same 2 teams, the Rockies and the Marlins.
The Rockies and the Marlins are my 2, pretty much universally thought of kind of as bottom dwellers this year. Last year, the Diamondbacks went 4-2 against the Marlins, which this year you would hope improves a little bit, maybe to 5-1. Maybe you can sweep them 2 times. And then the Rockies, the Diamondbacks last year were 9-4. So they mostly handled business against Colorado, minus 1 series in September, which came back to bite a little bit. I don't know if there's a whole lot to say about these 2 teams. I mean, they really were not active all offseason at all. And the Marlins, their calling card is a rotation spearheaded by Sandy Alcantara, who Cy Young winner, a guy everyone's going to want at the trade deadline. It seems very unlikely he finishes the season with the Marlins, and that's kind of part of the calculus as to why they're in this tier, because it's like, okay, if they're going to win games, it's going to be because of this rotation, but this rotation's not going to look the same when we get to the middle of the season anyway.
Yeah, knowing what we know about Peter Bendick so far out in Miami, I don't suspect that any relatively good players, or certainly not many relatively good players on that Marlins team last past the trade deadline. I guess some of the younger guys, there's some certain players that you'd like to see take steps forward if you're the Marlins. But yeah, someone like Sandy Alcantara, if he proves he's healthy in the first half, he has a chance to be one of the more highly sought after players at the trade deadline. As far as the Rockies are concerned, I don't have a ton to say there. Chase Dollander should be really interesting this season. I think
Can they develop a pitcher?
Can they develop a pitcher? I think it's very possible that Dollander is already one of the 5 best starters on that team, which frankly isn't.
I mean, they just lost Austin Gomber. He's going to start the year on the IL.
That's true. Maybe that paves the way for him to make the opening day roster. I don't know. But at the very least, the Rockies might have a starting pitcher this season at some point who is actually interesting. Not to say the others are never interesting.
We've kind of watched the movie before, because it's a lot of the same guys who've been there forever. It's German Marquez and Kyle Freeland, Antonio Senzatella. We've seen these guys for 7-8 years.
Yeah,
now
it feels like
team.
forever. Yeah.
And the offense is a little bit more interesting just because Brenton Doyle had such a good year last year, and Ezekiel Tovar had such a good year last year.
Right.
And you're kind of hoping for bounce backs from Nolan Jones and Chris Bryant. But a successful year for the Rockies is just okay, these 3 younger guys made the proper steps, and we can kind of build around them, because this is a team that's projected to do not a whole heck of a lot when it comes to wins. On Fangraphs, 65 and 97 is their projected win total, and then Pacoda has them at 55 wins on the season, which is a
wild
really
projection. Even no matter how bad you think the Rockies are, to project them to win 55 games is pretty bold. But there's a reason this tier is called "Are You Even Trying?" Because in the grand scheme of things, you'd like to think that these teams are trying when it comes to the future, but trying to win in 2025. Not so much. Doesn't look that way.
We've already spent too much time talking about the teams who are
maybe
not going all in on winning a championship this year. Have to squint is an interesting one, because I think this could be where we have some disagreements. I have 5 teams here.
I also have 5 teams here. That's not
a good sign.
We might just have the exact same list. We'll see.
I have the Nationals.
Yeah.
I have the Pirates.
Yep.
I have the Cardinals.
Yep.
I have the Giants.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the Cincinnati Reds.
Yep.
Okay. We talked about some things before we did this. We did not talk about that. We will have some disagreements later, I think. But we can kind of run through these a little bit, just because these are teams who, if all goes right, could be in the thick of a potential postseason race at the end of the year. Not likely. But if all goes right, if you squint hard enough, you may do that. And the team I had the hardest time here with was the Reds, because I almost put them in has the bones. A lot of projection systems do not like this team.
No.
Their biggest addition was getting Terry Francona to manage the club, which is not nothing.
That's true.
It's certainly not nothing.
Yeah.
Getting Matt McClain back from injury.
He was really, really good.
He was so good 2 years ago.
Yeah, that was a huge blow to them last season, losing him.
What kind of next step from Ellie De La Cruz? Getting Gavin Lux, getting Austin Hayes, just did they do enough offensively to kind of raise the floor of this group? And then with the pitching staff, I actually kind of like it. It's Hunter Green, Brady Singer, Nick Lodolo, Nick Martinez, and Andrew Abbott, with Brandon Williamson injured after he got Tommy John surgery, so he's probably not coming back. Yeah, he had Atlanta at the end of last year, so never mind about Brandon Williamson.
Yeah.
I don't hate their rotation. It's not like a bunch of aces, but it's a bunch of guys who are pretty steady. It's just that they're pitching half their games in Great American Ballpark, which is not particularly conducive to pitching staffs, which is why it kind of highlights the offense, which is probably, I think, the weaker element of this team when you're looking at the pitching staff versus the personnel they have in the lineup.
I also would say this bullpen is not particularly impressive. Alexis Diaz was not the same guy last year. You kind of wonder what you're getting.
He has to be good.
Yeah, he has to be really good. We've seen him be good in the past. Outside of him, I'm not, I think they brought in Taylor Rogers is on this team.
The left-handed one?
The left-handed one, yes. Yeah. Yes, this is Taylor, not Tyler. Yeah, there aren't, frankly, a lot of other impact arms, if any, in the bullpen. I think that could be a big issue for them. And I also will say, while I agree with you about the front five in the rotation looking pretty passable, especially Hunter Green at the top. He was outstanding last season, but you're probably looking at needing 9, 10, 11 starters to get through a full season. And I don't feel particularly great about where the Reds go after those top 5 names.
It depends on the prospects, right? Like Rhett Loader.
Sure.
Can you get something out of him?
Right.
Ryan Richardson, 25-year-old Connor Phillips. I mean, it's a lot of like, can guys step in whom haven't proven themselves yet? And so,
right.
I don't hate the depth, just because I think you have a little bit of upside there with the rotation that the 5 at the top as the floor is pretty good. I don't know. I was close to putting this in has the bones. I just have a few question marks about certain depth pieces in the offense, especially the top of the lineup could be really good. Heimer Candelario returning to form.
Yeah,
would help a lot.
They really need him to be. I mean, I think he was about a replacement level player, maybe a below replacement level player last year. That was supposed to be a guy who would really raise the floor of this team, and he did not exactly do that a season ago.
The Giants were also close for me for making it.
Yeah.
Who was closer for you, the Reds or the Giants?
I had the Giants closer.
Okay.
I think you look at a rotation that has Logan Webb, Justin Verlander, Robbie Ray, Jordan Hicks, Kyle Harrison potentially. I'm not sure exactly where they go at the back end. Hayden Birdsong's in the mix there as well. Those are just bigger names to me. Like I think the ceiling for that rotation, while I don't feel great about the floor, frankly, the ceiling of that rotation I think is fairly high. Like Robbie Ray won a Cy Young not that long ago. Verlander's Verlander, right? Hicks was really good last year until he kind of wasn't. Kyle Harrison, one of the better pitching prospects. I guess he's probably not in the prospect category anymore at this point, but still someone that you can dream on a little bit. So I think Willy Adames helps a lot. Like for us covering the Diamondbacks the past few years, one of the things that made the Giants a little challenging to watch at times was the fact that they just didn't have anyone who could really play shortstop. It's been sort of a revolving door, and Willy Adames is like pretty darn good.
The left side of their infield is a couple of studs.
Yeah, Matt Chapman, really good left Willy Adames is great, and they have like fairly viable players at most other positions. Jung Hoo Lee is another name that comes to mind as a key player for them, coming off that early season injury last year. Maybe he takes a step forward.
It's depth and difference makers for me.
Yeah,
it's just the top end talent. When you look at them compared to the rest of the division that they're going to be competing most of their games against, again, division games, it's not 19 anymore, it's 13, so there's a little bit less of an emphasis.
Right.
But they just don't have the top end talent that the rest of the division has. That said, I do think their floor is relatively high. I can't see them winning like fewer than 75 games unless something goes really wrong.
Sure.
It's just hard for me to imagine they win more than 85 games.
Yeah. While I do say like the ceiling of the rotation is relatively high, like, are you really expecting to get, a great version of Justin Verlander in his age 42 season? Like probably
130
not.
innings of a 4 ERA would be really good.
That would be pretty good at this point. I think that's a fair point. So yeah, I still, while I considered moving the Giants a tier higher, I didn't consider it for very long.
The Diamondbacks last year went 7-6 against the Giants, which I think should be considered pretty disappointing.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
They played them in September twice. They had a series where they probably could have swept them in the Bay and didn't. They won 2 out of 3, and then they lose a series in the last week of the season at home. This Giants team, again, kind of reminds me of last year in the sense that they can kind of get you on a given night. They have enough talent to get you. And so while I don't think that they're going to make the postseason necessarily, I definitely do think like you don't want to see them. You don't like circle that and be like, weekend against the Giants. Like, let's.
They're not a team you're expecting to roll over. But this Giants team, even after adding Willy Adames, frankly, still kind of feels like the same sort of team they've been the last few years, which is like right in the middle and not much better than that.
Totally agree. Diamondbacks played the Giants 6 times in September.
Oh, wow.
So this will be very relevant to what ends up happening with the Diamondbacks at the end of the season. The other three teams that we had in here, Nationals, Pirates, Cardinals. I think I'm going to go a little bit quicker on these. The Cardinals aren't trying to win. But they also at the same time haven't traded everybody like a total knockdown rebuilding team would. Like Ryan Helsley, whom I'm sure the Diamondbacks would love to continue to inquire about.
Right.
He's still on the team, and they haven't really been wanting to trade him.
Yeah.
Arenado,
for some
they tried
inexplicable reason.
They tried to trade Nolan Arenado, and they haven't. I think Sonny Gray has a no trade clause, so they can't unless they get his permission anyway.
Yeah.
They have a lot of guys like that, where it's like you could see them making moves halfway through the season. So that's where maybe are you even trying? Maybe they apply there a little bit.
Yeah, philosophically, you could argue they're in the "are you even trying" category, but they're certainly trying on a different level than the Rockies and Marlins.
Certainly.
I think it makes sense they're in it.
You want to catch them in the second half.
Sure. I think that's reasonable. I will say I thought about putting the Nationals in the "are you even trying" category. I think the Nationals are probably the worst team out of these five that we have in the have to squint category, and I'm not sure it's very close. Baseball Prospectus has them projected for 69 wins. Fangraphs has them at 73. Neither of those projection systems even gives them a 4% chance of making the postseason. So as much as the Nationals are definitely more interesting than the Rockies and the Marlins, like Dylan Cruz and James Wood are big names.
They actually did stuff too. I mean, they got Nathaniel Lowe.
Yeah, they got Nathaniel Lowe.
Josh Bell.
They got
Diamondbacks legend Josh Bell.
Diamondbacks legend Josh Bell, which is not really sarcasm because Josh Bell was outstanding last season.
Good when he came over.
After the trade. But yeah, the Pirates, I don't have a ton to say there. When you have Paul Skeens, you should be aggressive, and they didn't do that, and that's why they're very firmly in this category.
The Pirates are disappointing for that exact reason. I mean, this rotation, and even beyond Skeens, with Mitch Keller and Jarrett Jones, with the promise of a Bubba Chandler, they have a lot of talent, and they just go out and really don't do anything at all to adjust the offense. They got Tommy Pham, who should help.
Tommy Pham was like a replacement level player last year, so I don't know if he's necessarily moving the needle a ton. Frankly,
they got DJ Stewart.
They got Andrew Heaney, right?
Yeah, Spencer Horwitz, I guess. We'll see. He's going to start off injured though.
Right.
Yeah, it's just a team that, again, you don't want to catch them with a certain series because if you're going to Pittsburgh and what lines up in front of you is Skeens, Jones, Chandler, or Keller, or whomever. That's pretty tricky, and that's kind of what leaves them in this tier as opposed to are you even trying? Because the answer, are you even trying? The answer is kind of no.
Yeah.
Because they're not going out and really investing in the ball club the way that a lot of the fans over there would prefer them.
They did bring back Andrew McCutchen though, so
that's cool. I'm very pro keep Andrew McCutchen there as long as possible. It's a really cool story.
Yeah.
Last year the Diamondbacks went 5-1 against the Reds, just to kind of round out this part of our tier list. Against Pittsburgh, the Diamondbacks went 4-2. Against the Giants, as I mentioned, they went 7-6. Against the Cardinals, they went 3-3. They're going to want that to probably improve this year.
Yeah.
And against Washington, they went 5-1. Obviously, they had that crazy comeback where Corbin Carroll hit the walk-off home run. Finnegan. And then they won the next game 17-0, right? 17-1?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. Yeah,
and then
Patrick
they traded for
Corbin
Dylan Floro
on for that game.
And then, yeah.
Right.
Those were things that happened.
Yes.
Okay. Has the bones. I have 2.
Oh, okay. I have 3.
Okay.
Look at that. How exciting. We have an actual difference between us.
Disagreement. Good. One of these, I couldn't put them in dangerous because they already have a losing record, and that's the Cubs. They're already 0-1. They're already the last place team in the league.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. They do have a big mountain to climb.
But I also have the Brewers.
Okay, so you have Cubs and Brewers?
I have Cubs and Brewers.
Cubs and Brewers. I have the Padres and has the bones as well.
The Padres we should spend the most time on. Let's do Padres first.
Okay.
I had them and has the bones, but I switched them to dangerous because I felt like I was being too harsh on them. But I am I am a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, I like the Padres more than I like the Brewers. Somewhat similar to the Cubs, so I'm sure we'll talk about the Cubs more in a second. But the problem with the Padres is that their depth is like really bad, frankly. To the point where their everyday lineup has pretty obvious holes at multiple positions. And then you imagine, like, okay, what happens if some of these star level players get hurt? Then what does the lineup look like? Then what would, a rotation look like if some of those big names find their way on the IL at some point? And that's where I think they're in a precarious position. I still think the Padres have a totally reasonable chance to make the playoffs. So I'm not putting them in like some category where, it's a prayer for San Diego to make it to the postseason. Like, we're only a few months removed from at least me thinking that the Padres were going to win the World Series. So too. Like, I absolutely thought they were going to beat the Dodgers and they were going to win the World Series after that. But they just lost a lot of pieces over the offseason. It was Profar, Higashioka, Tanner Scott, Ha-Sung Kim, even someone like David Peralta, who filled in pretty nicely for them at times.
Still not on a team.
Right? Yeah, somehow I don't think David Peralta has found a team. None of those names are like, it's not like they lost Fernando Tatis, but a lot of those guys played really big roles.
Profar was really good.
Profar was really good, and Higashioka, if you're a D-backs fan, you don't even have to bring that up. Experienced Higashioka a little bit. So I just think that some of those losses, while they don't sound huge in and of themselves, you piece all of it together and you get a team that, if they stay healthy the whole year, I think they could be a very good team. But if they lose some of these guys, I think they're in a tough spot.
I wrote an NL West preview on the site, and the word I used is creaky. It feels creakier than usual.
Sure.
If everything goes right for the Padres this year, they win the World Series. Their lineup right now, and we're using Roster Resource because Fangraphs is the best, and it's so useful for everything when it comes to previewing a season.
Agreed.
Luis Arraez, Fernando Tatis Jr., Jackson Merrill, Manny Machado. That's the top of the lineup.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Then you have Jake Cronenworth coming off a down year.
Yeah.
You have Xander Bogaerts, who has not quite looked the same since donning a Padres uniform.
But it's okay because he only has
like 9 years left.
Yeah,
8 years left.
Yeah, I think it's 9 years left on his contract.
Yeah. Great. Then you have they have Jose Iglesias as the DH, as a non-roster invitee.
Yeah.
That's possible. Or you throw him in the infield and you throw Arraez there. You can do different things. But anyway, it looks like a starter on this team based on what he did last year.
Yeah.
Jason Hayward, who is going to be, he's 35 going on 36. And then you have Elias Diaz, who also did not have as good of a year after he was an all-star for the Rockies before that. And then some of the depth, you have Luis Campusano, Connor Joe, Eggy Rosario, Tyler Wade, not like MLB starting caliber players, at least everyday guys.
I would argue maybe not MLB bench caliber players in some ways.
Not.
At least not one of the more formidable bench units that you would see around the league.
But exactly, like if Tatis and Machado, knock on wood, because you don't want to see anybody ever get hurt, but like if Tatis and Machado miss time, you're in real trouble.
Right.
You're in real trouble. And then the rotation's the same thing. Michael King and Dylan Cease are an excellent top two of the rotation. Yu Darvish has already been shut down with some fatigue. He's older, may start the year not in the rotation. Nick Pivetta was a very, very clutch addition for them. But the back end of the rotation certainly has some questions, and same can be said as the front end of the bullpen. So it's a team that, again, everything goes right, they're going to be really, really hard to play. But not everything goes right. They can kind of put themselves in some trouble here.
Yeah, I think they'll be in the mix. Like, I don't expect the Padres to be out of it in July or something. Certainly, the top end talent is certainly there, but we'll see what happens over the course of the year.
The Padres, Fangraphs projects them at 82-80, which I think is a little harsh.
That does feel a little harsh.
Pacoda has them at 87 wins. Might be ambitious. Not ambitious, but that's kind of on the higher end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Last year, the Diamondbacks ended up with a 6-7 record against the Padres, which, many things were the difference between making the playoffs and missing the playoffs. So that's certainly one of them.
Yeah.
The other two teams in this category, which we both had, are the Cubs and the Brewers. The Brewers, I think, are pretty simple because they're the Brewers. They just kind of are who they are. They trade away Devin Williams. They lose Willy Adames. You get back Brandon Woodruff from injury. You're adding Nestor Cortez in that trade. And then just continued growth and excellence from William Contreras and Jackson Chourio and getting Christian Yelich back. It's a very talented team. I think it's an underrated team in terms of the talent because we just look at the Brewers and say like, oh, the Brewers, they'll just lose everybody and keep winning. I think there's still a pretty good talent level here. But at some point you do lose too many guys, right?
Yeah, I'm higher on the Brewers than what the projections say. Certainly, Fangraphs has them in 81 wins. Pacoda has them at 79.
That's harsh.
It feels very harsh to me. And I feel just in general like betting against the Brewers, like that has not panned out very well for people in recent years. Certainly, last season the expectations were not that high after they lost Corbin Burns, and then you saw them go out and win the division pretty handily and win over 90 games, which they seem to do every year. I think this is a better team than 81 or 79, but I think it's probably somewhere in the mid 80s where they're in the mix for a postseason spot. I don't know about you, Alex, but I have out of the Brewers and the Cubs within this tier, I would probably put the Cubs a little bit higher than the Brewers at this point.
I think I agree with you, but I think both of them have a relatively high floor. I'm a little bit more wary of the Cubs just because there's such a built-in like proven track record in Milwaukee that it's hard to not take them seriously.
Yeah.
Even when, they do trade away their closer and they don't bring anybody in to
I'm not real worried
right?
about them losing Devin Williams.
I mean, he missed most of last year anyway and they were fine.
Right, exactly. The Brewers
they just kind of do this.
They just have a bullpen factory over there. I'm not real worried about their bullpen, but yeah, I do think like offensively, is this an impact group in Milwaukee? I'm not so sure.
The depth of the lineup concerns me a little bit.
Yeah,
and they were really, really good with runners in scoring position last year.
Yeah, like you had some mind blowing numbers on this.
Their BABIP with runners in scoring position last year was 328, which is way higher than everybody else.
Yeah,
they've kind of done that before. It's not like, out of nowhere necessarily. It's hard to imagine they do that again. And they did it with a 25% K rate. So that's kind of a thing where it's like, okay, if they're striking out a lot, and, it's slightly different personnel because you don't have Adames and you're adding in some younger guys. There could be a little bit of regression. This was a top 10 scoring offense last year. When you look at the talent level on paper, at least, it doesn't look like a top 10 scoring offense this year. And if it's not, that puts more pressure on a pitching staff that I think adding Jose Quintana certainly helps, and getting Brandon Woodruff back is going to help. But it's certainly not flawless either. So I agree with you. I think they probably get a mid-80s win team, and somebody that's going to be both in the mix for the division and for the wild card by the end of the year. I don't know if I have them favored for either one of those races, though.
Yeah, the Cubs got Kyle Tucker, man. And
the Cubs got Kyle Tucker.
And Kyle Tucker is pretty darn good at baseball. It is just one season, and I know that was kind of a controversial move for that reason. But the Cubs,
for a mid-market team, it's a really savvy move. It's a really excellent addition.
Right.
For mid-market Chicago.
Yeah, mid-market Chicago, exactly. Pacoda has the Cubs at 92 wins, which I think is kind of outrageous. Fangraphs has them at 84.
I think somewhere in between.
I think somewhere in between is pretty reasonable. I do look at P. Crow Armstrong as an intriguing player for 2025. He had an OPS up over 800 from August 2nd through the end of the year. That's about 50 games where he was really starting to hit. And I think if you get some offense from him in center, obviously the defense is going to be there. Ian Happ is a pretty good player in left field. Obviously Kyle Tucker doing his thing in right. Nico Horner, Dansby Swanson, Michael Busch. There's some guys on the infield there. Seiya Suzuki moving into a primary DH role.
The defense should be better.
Yeah.
The defense of the team will be good.
The defense should be pretty good. And I just think that they've got like a pretty competent player everywhere. And they have Kyle Tucker, who is the superstar caliber player that the Cubs have needed for a long time.
It's like the Giants thing, where it's like there's competence everywhere, but this team has the superstar and that team doesn't.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a difference. Obviously, the division they play in also kind of a main difference. Yeah, but you look at it's so funny. On roster resource, they have the starting rotation as Imanaga and Steele.
Yeah,
and that's it. There's only the two because they're the ones in Japan.
Yeah,
which is hilarious. They also went out and they got Matthew Boyd, who was really good for the Guardians, but it's a pretty small sample size, so I'm going to give him a 2-year contract.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Bit of a gamble.
It's a little bit of a gamble. They went out and they got Ryan Presley to be the closer. They added a few more bullpen pieces like Ryan Brazier from the Dodgers and Eli Morgan from the Guardians. You're right. It just feels like it's pretty solid everywhere. But then you look at some of the other teams we're going to get to later, some of the NL East teams, some of the other NL West teams, where it just feels like the top-end talent, it doesn't quite match up beat for beat. But at the same time, it's hard for me to imagine that this team won't be like either leading the NL Central or like within a couple games of the NL Central when we get into the meat of it in September. This is also the team the Diamondbacks are going to start the season against.
This is true.
A 4-game series at Chase Field. So
who's starting on opening day, Alex?
So it's actually, okay, total sidebar, but I'm glad you brought that up. MLB released a press release at the start of today. So today's Thursday or Tuesday, the 18th. They released a press release promoting the opening day starting pitching matchups, right?
Because surely all of the managers have decided by now.
Of course. The other day, Torey Lovello told us that MLB's kind of coming after him, but he's doing his best to block them away as he takes his time, and they make a decision internally on who they're going to start between Corbin Burnes and Zach Gallen. And so they have this like whole press release, and it's like, oh, in accordance to all 30 major league teams, here it is, and here's the list. And there's one game where it's TBD versus TBD, and that's Diamondbacks Cubs. And Cubs, it's understandable because they're coming back from Japan, and their season's already started. For Diamondbacks, it's just kind of funny. But I imagine we're going to learn here in the next 24 hours the next 24 to 48 hours who the opening day starter will be between Burnes and Gallen. I do not know. I'm not sure which one. I'm pretty 50-50 on who it ended up being. Okay. But that's my sidebar on that one. We do not know who's starting on opening day for Diamondbacks versus Cubs. But that's the matchup that we're going to get. Last year, the Diamondbacks, when they took on the Cubs, they went 3-3. And when they faced the Brewers, they went 4-3. Obviously, the one of those three stands out above everything else. They played pretty decently well against these teams, but surely you go into the season hoping that you can improve by a win or two.
Sure. Okay. So did I convince you to include the Padres in the has the bones category?
I'm still leaving them in dangerous, but I kind of have them on an island because I definitely don't think they're as dangerous as the other three teams that I have in dangerous.
Sure.
But I also think they're probably a bit of a step ahead of the Brewers and Cubs, just when it comes to top end talent.
I would agree. Yeah, me including them in has the bones. I still think they're definitely the best team out of the three.
But if the Padres like stink somehow for like the first like 2.5 months of the season, and there's like a pretty uphill climb, Dylan Cease is on the last year of that deal, and so is Michael King.
Yeah.
Then that becomes super interesting about kind of direction. And I think Luis Ariz is also somebody who's going to be on the trading block potentially. They're going to lose a lot of, theoretically in position to lose a lot of key players next winter. So that's, again, creaky. A little, I don't know. We'll see. Dangerous. I had them, but kind of on the bottom tier of that. And then I have 3 other teams in dangerous.
I have two teams.
Okay.
2 teams in dangerous.
Who are your 2?
My 2 are the New York Mets and the Arizona Diamondbacks.
Okay. I have the Mets, D-backs, and Phillies.
So you're putting Phillies in the dangerous category, whereas I have them in the highest tier.
Yes.
Okay.
Did you read the Athletics power rankings?
Yeah, well,
the D-backs ahead of the Phillies.
They do have the D-backs ahead of the Phillies.
I was a little surprised by, but
I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. Yeah, I don't know. Should we talk about the Phillies and why I have them in the next tier?
Sure.
So
actually, let's. Yeah. I was going to say maybe we save it because they're on the border of dangerous and surefire.
Okay.
But let's start with them because I think this is a good conversation about a team that has been there and almost done that, but hasn't quite been there and done that.
Yeah, that's a good way. That's a good way of saying it. I just can't talk myself into a scenario where the Phillies don't make the playoffs. I just can't do it. It's not that I think the Phillies are the best team in the National League or that they're necessarily going to win 100 games or anything. But I just, looking at their roster, I just don't see how the Phillies don't wind up in the postseason. I certainly have them below the other 2 teams in the surefire category, which we'll get into in a second. But for me, they're still they still feel like a surefire team to make the postseason.
I have a hard time believing they won't either, just because this is probably the best rotation in the National League.
Yeah.
You can argue Dodgers, Diamondbacks are up there.
Jesus Luzardo adds some some more depth to a rotation that already had plenty.
Yeah. I mean, Wheeler, Christopher Sanchez, Nola, Ranger Suarez. That's pretty sick. I mean, that's pretty disgusting.
That's pretty darn good.
And then you have Andrew Painter as kind of a wild card,
lurking,
who could be a really big difference maker, or not. Who knows? He's a young rookie, but could be somebody who comes up in the second half if somebody gets hurt, and that makes them all that much more interesting. This is an offense that, again, lots of name recognition, lots of star power. Basically, all guys kind of either in their early 30s or entering their mid 30s. Except for like Alec Boehm and Bryson Stott and Brandon Marsh.
Right.
But pretty much, but everybody else is kind of in that this is going to happen sooner rather than later kind of a conversation. That's the only thing, is just the depth of the lineup, especially the offensive depth when they have, like when you look at the bench, it's a lot of really good defensive players, but not necessarily offensive players. And then, so I don't know. I guess that's the reason why I don't have them in Surefire, is just kind of the volatility of like relying on an old team that has increased its win total every year for 6 years, which is incredible. But just impressive. Having enough go right again to continue on that trajectory. I guess that's why maybe it doesn't sound like a great argument, but like this is a really, really good rotation. The bullpen should still be pretty good, but maybe not quite as good.
Yeah, maybe not as good.
And then it's a lineup that is basically running it back from what we've already seen, with just guys getting older. And again, this is Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber we're talking about. These are great players. There's just an extra added level of volatility every single year you play in this game.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it's and JT Realmuto is 34 years old now. Like these are key players on this roster. Trey Turner's only 31, but he's still definitely shown some signs of aging here in the last few years. So I understand the concerns with the regression. I just look at that starting rotation, and I'm like, how on earth is this team going to win like 83 games and miss the play? Like, I just can't.
I can't really imagine it either.
Yeah.
They are on, if I'm my dangerous tiers, I guess there's like tiers within the tiers. I certainly have the Phillies on top of that, and I have the Padres on the bottom of that.
Okay.
But I just feel strongly about the top two teams a little bit more so than I do about this Phillies team.
Sure.
Just because of that volatility a little bit. But yeah, this is a team that they lose the World Series, then they lose the NLCS, then they lose the NLDS.
They're not exactly moving in the right direction.
That's the interesting thing, though. It's because the rotation seems to keep getting better as Sanchez gets better, and now Painter might be adding it to it. But again, they haven't quite gotten over that hump, and now their division is harder, and now the league is harder.
Yeah.
It feels like it doesn't. Again, their window is not closed. They could absolutely win a World Series this year, but it does feel like their best chance at winning a World Series probably was when they were in the World Series, and then when they lost in the NLCS.
Yeah. Still wild that happened.
Yeah. Pretty incredible.
Who beat them again? How did that go
Pretty
down?
Incredible. You want to do Mets or D-backs first?
Well, it's a D-back show, right? So I guess
save them?
Sure. We save them. So Mets. I think that the Mets pitching staff get to in a second. Like, there are definitely reasons to be a little skeptical there. But this offense is going to score a whole lot of runs. I mean, it's basically the same offense as last year, which was already 7th in the league in runs scored, plus Juan Soto. And that helps. And that's like,
and he did lose Alonso.
You're right. Alonso is back. So a lot of the other key contributors, basically everyone, I think, is back. And then you're just adding in, one of the best hitters on the planet in Juan Soto. So, we saw last year a Diamondbacks team that did not pitch well at all win 89 games just because their offense was so good. And I kind of view the Mets in a similar way where, I don't know if they're going to score the most runs in baseball like the D-backs did a year ago, but I also think their pitching is probably going to be a little better than where the Diamondbacks were last year. And so I see that landing them somewhere, probably in the upper 80s in terms of win total. I know Fangraphs has them at 86. Baseball Prospectus has them projected for 91. I think those numbers are pretty reasonable.
Pacoda has Philly at 85.8 and the Mets at 91.3.
Pacoda really hates the Phillies. This happened last year too. Yeah,
that seems a pretty big gap. I pretty much agree with everything you said there. Lineup wise, I mean, this is stacked. Francisco Lindor, notorious for getting off to slow starts, missing the All-Star game, and then being like the best player in the world for like the second half of the season for whatever reason. And now you're adding Juan Soto on top of that. I don't know. The back end of the lineup maybe isn't quite as deep as a couple of the teams that we're going to get to here. But they're also dealing with some injuries. If Francisco Alvarez comes in and is like gangbusters, that helps a ton. If Ronnie Mauricio or Luis Angel Acuna or one of these younger guys steps in, they have some good optionality there, and that's a credit to what the front office has been able to do the last couple of years. And then, you're right. Clay Holmes is the opening day starter.
Yeah, Clay Holmes,
which is super interesting. It's not Kodai Senga.
You mean he's pitching out of the bullpen on opening day, right?
No, opening day starter. Former Yankees closer.
He's a starting pitcher. Okay.
So that's super nuts. And then Kodai Senga is kind of the X factor probably for the team.
Yeah.
I feel like we know what we're going to get at a Juan Soto. You feel pretty good what you're going to get at a Francisco Lindor. If you get like an ace caliber season out of Kodai Senga, then that kind of changes the ceiling of this team and what they can do. Then it's like you're really looking at them as a World Series contender. If Minaya gets back to being healthy and is kind of even like 85%, 90% of what he was last year.
He was really
Senga
good last year. Yeah.
Is back to kind of 2023 version of Senga before he got hurt. That's a legitimate 1-2 in a rotation that, as it looks right now, you could be a little bit skeptical, has a legitimate like 1-2 punch, but has some decent depth. But if you take this depth, you have the top of the rotation. That's really good stuff. Right now it's Clay Holmes, Kodai Senga, David Peterson, Tyler McGill, and Griffin Canning. Doesn't look amazing on paper. That's also with Frankie Montas on the injured list as well.
Right.
So you're just kind of getting everybody back, and I think it's one of those things where like the high end of it is really, really high. The low end of it maybe isn't bottoming out because they have enough depth to cover, but it certainly is not one of the best pitching staffs in the league. So they are going to have to lean on this offense to score a lot of runs, and they're positioned to score a lot of runs.
Yeah, right. I think they probably will score a lot of runs. I also will say that David Peterson had a 2.90 ERA last year in 21 starts. I don't know if I see him replicating that entirely, but he's another guy who has shown a relatively high ceiling, in very recent history. So, the offense is going to score a bunch of runs, and the pitching staff.
It's the David Stearns brings over the Milwaukee pitching factory.
Right.
Just guys get good.
Yeah.
Severino just got good.
Yeah.
Again, after injuries were halting him back, and then got really, really good.
Minaya got extremely good.
Quintana basically rejuvenated his career before getting to the Mets, and then continuing that with the Mets. So I don't know. Maybe this is the perfect team for somebody like a Clay Holmes and Griffin Canning to kind of rebuild kind of the stock that they've had. But Braves and Dodgers are mine. Braves and Dodgers are yours, with the Phillies included in that.
With the Phillies, yep.
Dodgers, I don't know. What do we have to say? What do I have to say about the Dodgers?
Well, they had a decent offseason, I guess you could say. The question for me is just how many games will they win? I know last season people were throwing out some crazy numbers, and that didn't really pan out. They wound up winning 98 games. Was that still the most in Major League Baseball? Yes, it was, but it wasn't as high of a number.
They didn't win 120.
Yeah, they didn't win 120.
Could they win 120 this year?
I don't think so. I don't think they're going to win 120. But what's different about the Dodgers this season is that the pitching depth that they have is absolute insanity. And I know the depth was pretty good last year too, and they still wound up going through like all of it. There were that many injuries, but this year it's like you could still have quite a few injuries, and you're going to put together a pretty darn good rotation all the same. I mean, you look at Yamamoto, Sasaki, Glasnow, Schnell, Dustin May, Tony Gonsolin coming back at some point, Clayton Kershaw, who's still here, coming back at some point, some guy named Shohei Ohtani, who apparently also pitches, and there's other respectable arms beyond that. So this is a Dodgers team that was 13th in team ERA a season ago, and And I think they're going to be probably much better than that this year, coupled with an offense that still figures to be very, very good. I think they're going to win a heck of a lot of baseball games, and it will be fascinating to see how many they are able to win ultimately.
Yeah. When I talk about like the best rotations in baseball and focusing in on the National League, I think top 5, you can make a case for the Phillies.
Yeah.
When it comes to depth, it's this one, and it's not particularly close.
Yeah, the depth is pretty insane.
And when we get to like, going into a playoff series, you're picking your top 4 guys. Like the Phillies, okay, Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, Sanchez in some order, versus Yamamoto, Snell, Glasnow, Ohtani. I don't know. If we can actually get to a point where all these guys are healthy at the same time, that's pretty devastating. The place that they really improved too is bullpen by getting Tanner Scott and Kirby Yates and spending just an exorbitant amount of money again. And people are like, oh, what about the deferrals? This team's payroll is like twice the Diamondbacks with the deferrals.
Yeah, right.
So this is just a team that's gone out and be like, all right, we're going to try to build a foolproof roster, because baseball doesn't really lend itself to dynasties, at least not in kind of the functional, like they're going to win 4 in a row or 3 in a row.
In terms of winning a World Series.
In terms of winning a World Series.
Difficult.
Because people have different definitions of dynasties, like what the Astros did, going to 7 straight American League Championship Series. Is that a dynasty? Well, they won 2 World Series, and those came, 4 years apart? 5 years apart?
Yeah.
No team has repeated as champions, and this is a stat that gets thrown out all the time, every single World Series. The Yankees from 1998 to 2000 are the last team to do it twice in a row when they three-peated. The Dodgers just won the World Series. So it's really, really hard to do it again, because you need a certain amount of things to go your way in order to build up that run in the postseason. Yeah. That didn't really happen for them. They were up against the wall against the Padres. Their pitching staff was in shambles. They basically had Yamamoto, Jack Flaherty, and then Ben Kasperius helped out with them, but it was some bullpen games in there too. So did they do enough to build kind of a foolproof roster? I think they did the best that anybody could possibly do.
Yeah.
But there is no such thing as a foolproof roster. And if you look at offensively, that's where maybe there will be a few cracks this year. I think the pitching staff is going to be ridiculous, and that just is what it is. Yeah. I think offensively, they're still going to score a lot of runs. They still have the defending MVP in Shohei Ohtani. But this is also an older group. And we've already seen some injury stuff pop up, and Freddie Freeman was scratched in their first game against the Cubs. Mookie Betts, hopefully he gets, well soon, but I know he's been dealing with
it's
a pretty severe illness.
Yeah.
That's obviously not anything anybody can control or age related or anything like that. But just when you look at the offense, it is a little bit older. And there are some guys who, have had really good seasons lately and some not so good seasons lately. It's just a really, really good top of the lineup. It does have good depth. I'm trying to pick nits here because this is a really, really good team. But when it comes to what could possibly hold us back, maybe pitching injuries are always one.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit more volatility with the offense than is expected. That said, this team could win 110 games, and I wouldn't be particularly surprised.
No, I wouldn't really be surprised by that at all. Yeah, you're right. There are some age factors there for sure. Like Teoscar Hernandez was awesome last year. I don't know if he's gonna be quite that good again.
He was remarkably good last year.
But at the same time, I mean, the floor with a lot of these players is still pretty good. Like a down season for Freddie Freeman. I mean, you could argue that last year was kind of a down season for Freddie Freeman. So, still one of the best first basemen in all of baseball. So
137 WRC plus last year was a down season for him.
Yeah,
that's still incredible. Will Smith had a down season and had a 111 WRC plus last year. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
I think they're going to score some runs. I think they're going to be all right.
I'm just trying to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. They're going to be really good. They're going to be really hard to catch. We'll talk about the Diamondbacks and their chances potentially at that. Let's do Braves quickly.
Sure.
I have them in Surefire. You have them in Surefire.
Yeah.
This is a team that won 89 games when a lot went wrong for them last year.
Yeah.
They're going to get Spencer Strider back the first month of the season. They're going to get Ronald Acuna Jr. back in May. They added Jurickson Profar. I don't know if Jurickson Profar is going to be a 5-win player every year for the next the next 3 years.
Probably
but
not.
He was pretty darn good last year, and that is a big addition for them. And this is a team that led the league in runs, scored a ton of runs in 2023. And now, if you get Acuna back, and you have a more consistent season from Matt Olson and Albies and Austin Riley, it's a really, really scary lineup. It might be the scariest lineup top to bottom, if healthy, in the league, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty good case to be made there. I mean, literally, you can go to every single position on the diamond. I mean, I guess Sean Murphy was not particularly good last year, but he has been quite good in the not too distant past. There are some questions you could ask at certain places, but even Orlando Arcia was an all-star recently. If I'm
not counting on that again.
I'm not counting on that again either.
He can pick it, but hitting wise, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe Arcia is not middle of the lineup guy on most teams, but yeah, on the Braves he hits 8th or 9th, right?
Yeah,
and everyone else like Matt Olson, Ozzie Albies, Austin Riley, Marcelo Zuna was unbelievable last year. Michael Harris, Profar coming in, Ronald Acuna, who was awfully good last time. The last time he was healthy for a full season. So
won the MVP.
I don't know if you're going to get that coming off another torn ACL, but yeah, this offense, the ceiling is
just good. That's still a heck of a lineup,
and that seems like a reasonably safe bet to make. So yeah, this lineup, as long as they don't get completely obliterated by injuries as they did a season ago, which I think it's likely they'll have at least somewhat better injury luck this year.
They don't have amazing depth. The Dodgers are better depth.
Sure.
The Dodgers do have better depth there, and they're probably more able to withstand that stuff. But yeah, just looking at the 1 through 9, if everybody's healthy,
yeah,
this is pretty good stuff.
It's pretty darn good.
And then you have the reigning Cy Young winner, Chris Sale, going to be the opening day starter.
Yeah.
Ronaldo Lopez coming off a really good season and coming back to the rotation. Spencer Schwellenbach looked like a stud last year. And then you're waiting for Spencer Strider to get back in there. But once he does, it's pretty darn good 1 through 4. Grant Holmes, AJ Smith-Shawver, they have some options on who can be that 5th guy. I don't know. You can go down and run out of options a little bit. Bryce Elder, Hurston Waldrop, they have some guys who have been major leaguers before.
Sure.
But, if healthy, that top 5 is also quite good. They have a good closer, Raisel Iglesias. I just kind of harken back to this team somehow won 89 games last year.
Very impressive.
And this, with all the injuries, from a talent perspective, probably shouldn't have won 89 games last year, but they got in. They didn't do anything with it. They got smoked by the Padres pretty quickly and eliminated.
Right.
But it was a pretty big accomplishment given everything they went through to get to the postseason. Now that they're, in an ideal world for them, going to be fully healthy again. That just, it's probably, it just gives kind of the top of the National League that much more firepower when the National League is already pretty loaded. Yeah,
I think the Dodgers are we could probably put the Dodgers in a tier of their own if we really wanted to. On
paper, the Dodgers are pretty sizably the best team.
We could have a Dodgers tier if we really wanted to. So there's a gap there. But I sort of like I said earlier about the Phillies, but I believe it even more so with the Braves. I can't really imagine a scenario where this Braves team doesn't find its way to the playoffs. So that's why they're in the Surefire category.
There we go. Last year, the Diamondbacks went 2-5 against Atlanta and certainly left a sour taste in their mouth because that easily could have been 5-2.
Yeah.
That was, again, why the Braves made the playoffs and the Diamondbacks didn't make the playoffs. Those games had a lot to do with that. Last year, the Diamondbacks against the Dodgers went 6-7. To go over from the last year, the D-backs went 3-4 against the Mets. They went 4-3 against Philadelphia. So more wins to be had when it comes to facing the best teams in the National League, I think for sure. Again, D-backs won 89 games. It's hard to ask them to do a whole heck of a lot more than that.
Yeah.
But you look at some of those records, and if they were a little bit better in this game and that game and this game, that's how baseball works, though. Let's do Diamondbacks and just kind of, with everything we just talked about in the league as it stood, we both have Diamondbacks in dangerous, not quite in surefire. I don't have them in surefire because they're in the NL West, in that if everything goes well for the Dodgers and if they stay healthy, it's hard to imagine they don't win the division, and because of that, it just limits the number of avenues you have to get into the postseason, as was the case last year, because I think the Diamondbacks would have been pretty hard to play in the playoffs last year had they gotten there. Like if they got in the playoffs and they went to Milwaukee, I think that's a hard series for Milwaukee to have to do that again. And so that's why I had them in that tier. The Athletic, when they did it, when they put the Diamondbacks third, they had like the Dodgers first, like 97% chance to make the playoffs. The Braves second at, I don't know, high. I forget the exact percentage, but it was pretty high.
Something,
and then they had the Diamondbacks third at like 43% or something like that. And that's just because they play in the National League West. But this is a team that, see, we know very well. That's why you're here. That last year led the league in runs, obviously, and it wasn't the only offensive category where they were great. They were really, really good with runners in scoring position. They were good at everything, really. Getting on base. They were not striking out a lot. And a lot of those would probably reign true this year in terms of guys who are really good at getting on base, guys who do not strike out a lot. They put the ball in play. It might look a little bit different because you're hoping to have a full season of what you got in the second half out of Corbin Carroll.
Could you very well could get. Like, I don't think that's outrageous.
Could you get a 30-homer season out of Corbin Carroll? Could you get a 50 stolen base season? We've already gotten a 50 stolen base season out of Corbin Carroll, right? Josh Naylor is a different player than whom they had last year a little bit. From an offensive profile perspective, he's a guy who puts the ball in play a lot. He had 31 home runs last year, but if he hits 20 this year with like a million doubles, that wouldn't be overly surprising. Doesn't strike out a ton. And the rest of the lineup, you're just kind of looking for guys getting better, like a Gabby Moreno, or can you get something out of Alec Thomas, right? They're going to be counting on Pavin Smith a little bit more, but they're not overly reliant on any of these guys either because of the depth that they have. And because of that depth, I haven't even mentioned Ketel Marte, who was MVP finalist last year and was ridiculously good until he got hurt. And even when he came back was pretty good. He was just a little bit more limited in how much he could play. This is a team with a pretty high floor, in my opinion, because that offense is so good and because of what they did in the pitching staff, which we'll certainly get into.
Yeah, I was looking at their projected lineup over on Roster Resource, and they are projected to have an above-average hitter at every single position except for shortstop. And there they have Geraldo Perdomo projected for a 99 WRC plus, which
1%
is
lower than the average.
1% below league average.
That's what they were last year.
Yeah.
Essentially. They had competence everywhere. Right. They were healthy.
Right. And that's why, like, yes, you are sort of replacing Christian Walker and Jock Peterson with one guy in Josh Naylor, which, on paper, that feels like you're probably going to lose some production there. And I think you probably will lose some production there. But it doesn't mean that this offense is going from the best in the league to, middle of the pack necessarily. Like, if you have someone who's above average everywhere, you're going to have a pretty good offense. And that's basically what the Diamondbacks are looks like they're going to have.
They do not expect necessarily, I mean, Mike Hazen has said this, and I think some other people have certainly said this. They're not going to lead the league in runs again, most likely. It's just really hard to do it.
Yeah.
No team has led the league in runs in back-to-back seasons since the 2009-10 Yankees, which had Mark Teixeira and A-Rod and Jeter and Robinson Cano and won the World Series in 2009. It's hard. Teams have done it in 2 out of 3 years, but to do it in back-to-back years, it requires a lot going right. But if this team has the 7th best offense or the 8th best offense or the 4th best offense or something like that, which is very possible. I'm not saying it's impossible that they don't lead the league in runs. I'm just saying it's hard to do it.
It's very hard to do
but
it
if they don't, but if they're still kind of like a top 10 offense and this pitching staff, instead of ranking 27th in team ERA, is 12th or 8th or even better than that, that's a team that it's going to be hard to keep out of the postseason. And that pitching staff now includes a Corbin Burns, Zach Gallen, Merrill Kelly, and Eduardo Rodriguez rotation. We don't know who the 5th starter is. We're probably going to figure that out pretty soon because opening day is next week. So we're going to have to figure that out pretty quickly. We don't know who the closer is, but they have options, and we know who they are. And it's AJ Puck, it's Kevin Ginkel, it's Justin Martinez. It's all pretty good options. It's not really a grasping at straws thing.
Right.
And the depth of the bullpen should be a little bit better. Obviously, who you pick for the rotation kind of goes into that a little bit. They added Shelby Miller, who's been a good reliever throughout the second half of his career, and kind of a fascinating career when you look at the first half and how it ended with the Diamondbacks and now where it is. Dre Jameson obviously has been kind of the talk of spring training a lot of the time just because of how good he's looked coming off of Tommy John. So there's a lot of like really intriguing options to kind of give this pitching staff, not only the starting rotation, but the bullpen itself, a lot of intrigue around the league, and a team that if they are like a really good defense, a really good offense, and a really good pitching staff. If the Dodgers win 110 games, like, okay, the Diamondbacks could still win 93 or 95 games or something like that,
right,
and still make one of those top wildcard spots.
Yeah, I remember hearing an interview recently with Mike Hazen. I think it was probably on one of your guys' shows here at Arizona Sports, and he talked about how he's never made it through a spring training with like the 5 starters.
He said it was like 0 for 25 or something.
Yeah. And what's kind of hilarious to me is that, at least as of right now, knock on wood, right? Everyone has survived in full health, and we're just about a week away from opening day. So funny how those things work, but that is also a good thing. Like the pitching depth is intact. Do you know what you're going to get out of Jordan Montgomery in whatever role you have him in? I don't think so. I think there's still a lot of questions there. Some questions with other guys as well. Erod, this is certainly a big year coming off a somewhat disappointing first year with the D-backs where he just wasn't healthy for 4 months. There's some questions on the pitching side, but with the depth that they've assembled and these guys all healthy at least to this point, like, you have to feel pretty good with Corbin, Burns at the top. I think you feel very good about this rotation being significantly better than it was a year ago. And as we were talking about earlier with the offense, yes, it probably will take a step back, but if you have an above average rotation and you still have top 5, top 10 offense, whatever it is, like, you're putting yourself in a pretty darn good position.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What is it? Pacoda has them at 87. And Fangraphs has them at 86. I think it's been pretty consistent in terms of like over-unders and what is expected of them.
Yeah.
This is a team with external and internal expectations to make the playoffs. I think most around the league most like kind of outlets and national media outlets have kind of projected them to be at least right on the cusp of making the postseason, if not totally in the postseason. It's a big year for them because it's a year where we don't know exactly what the next winter is going to look like, because you have Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly and Eugenio Suarez and Jordan Montgomery and Josh Naylor and potentially Lourdes Gurriel Jr. and potentially Randall Grichuk all entering free agency. That doesn't mean they can't keep that window open, because they still have a ton of talent in-house under contract, and then potentially some maneuverability with that. They could bring guys back. You never know. But in terms of just having this team together, this is a pretty big year for them, and they've set themselves up pretty nicely considering what's gone on around them when so many other teams in the National League made huge moves to bring in Juan Soto or Kyle Tucker or Roki Sasaki or Blake Snell, that they'll be in the mix. The NL is so much better than the American League this year.
Yeah.
We're just looking at all these teams and looking at lineups and projections and all that stuff.
I think this exercise, this exercise we just did would probably be a little easier in the American League.
We wouldn't have as much to say in the American, or we would have more nits to pick.
Yeah.
I feel like in the American League.
Yeah, for sure.
But all these teams are stacked. It should make for a really, really fun year of National League Baseball where the competition level is super duper high. So it should be really, really exciting. The season starts next Thursday on March 27th for the Diamondbacks. Again, they are starting off the year at home. They are going to take on the Chicago Cubs for 4 games. It's a pretty tough start to the season schedule for them, because it's 4 in Chicago, or 4 against Chicago, 3 at the Yankees, 3 at the Nationals, 3 versus the Orioles, 3 versus the Brewers, and then it's 3 at Miami, and then 3 at the Cubs again. Rays, Braves, Mets, Phillies. I mean, it's pretty hard, so they're going to be pretty battle tested early on before it evens out a little bit. But it will kind of give us an opportunity to see kind of how they stack up against some of the better teams in the league from a very early stage of this, assuming that they can stay healthy, unlike what happened last year, which will be super interesting to see if they can do it. So anyway, thank you for doing this. This was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. But
we just love talking ball, Alex. It's hard to get us to stop. This has been happening in the press box for years.
Absolutely. So. Hard to get us to stop, as evidenced by our have to squint part of it, probably. But be that as it may, I really appreciate you hopping on, because this was super fun, and you're welcome anytime. Jesse Friedman, thank you so much. Diamondback season, it starts next week. So we'll have a couple more shows for you before we get going, previewing the season. We still, again, as I mentioned, there's still a lot of decisions left to be made with this baseball team. So we will, come back with reactions to those, what happens in the rotation, what happens in the bullpen. So keep it locked in on Arizona Sports for all things Diamondbacks as we get going.